The first thing Jonah Hale noticed was not that the woman was beautiful. It was that she was losing a battle with the mud and still refused to look beaten. The road outside Lonesome Creek had always been mean after rain. It bent low near the cottonwoods, where wagon wheels sank deep and the earth held tight like a hand around a boot. Most travelers cursed that stretch. Some shouted for help before they even climbed down, but this woman did neither. Her wagon sat tilted hard to one side, the right front wheel buried almost to the hub. The horse stood with its ears flicking, tired and damp from the long road. A cold spring wind moved through the grass and shook the loose canvas tied over the wagon bed. The woman stepped down carefully, gathered the hem of her brown traveling dress, and studied the trouble as if it were a sum on a school slate. Then she reached into the wagon, pulled out a short board, placed it near the sunken wheel, and pushed her shoulder against the wagon frame. Jonah stopped mending his fence. He was 27 years old, tall from work rather than pride, with sun-browned hands and quiet eyes that missed little. The Hale Ranch had sat 3 miles west of Lonesome Creek since before Jonah was born. His father had built the house, his mother had planted the lilacs by the porch, and Jonah had buried them both before he was old enough to stop needing their voices. Since then, he had learned the habits of silence. He knew the sound of wind under the eaves. He knew the groan of old timber in winter. He knew how a man could sit at a supper table with 4 chairs and still hear nothing but his own spoon against the bowl. So when a stranger drove into his afternoon and got stuck in the mud, Jonah noticed. He waited one moment longer than most men would have, not from rudeness, but because something about her warned him not to rush in like she was helpless. She pushed again. The wagon rocked, then settled deeper. Only then did Jonah set his hammer on the fence post and walk down the slope. "Ma'am," he said. She turned. Her hair was dark auburn, pinned low beneath a plain hat, with a few silver threads showing near her temples. She looked near 40, maybe a little past it, though there was nothing weak or faded in her face. Her eyes were gray, steady, and tired in a way Jonah understood before he could name it. She took him in with one sharp glance. His boots, his work shirt, the mud on his sleeves, the fence tools in his hand. "I have it handled," she said. Jonah looked at the wagon wheel. "I can see that." Her mouth tightened, but not quite into anger. "I did not ask for help." "No, ma'am." "Then why are you standing there?" "Because that wheel is buried deep enough to grow roots by morning." For a breath, the wind filled the space between them. The horse shifted and gave a soft snort. The woman looked at the wheel again, and Jonah saw the hard truth settle in her face. She did not want help, but she needed it. That seemed to cost her more than it should have. "What is your name?" she asked. "Jonah Hale." She nodded once, like she had placed him in some proper drawer inside her mind. "Clara Whitcomb." "Where are you headed, Miss Whitcomb?" "Lonesome Creek. I am to teach at the schoolhouse." Jonah glanced toward town, hidden beyond the low ridge. "Then you are close." "Close is not arrived." "No, it is not." She looked at him again. There was dust on her gloves, mud on the side of her skirt, and a weariness around her eyes that had not come from one day's travel. Still, her chin stayed lifted. Jonah stepped toward the wheel. "You take the reins. When I push, give the horse a little room to pull, not too hard." "I know how to drive a wagon, Mr. Hale." "I figured you did." She climbed back onto the seat without answering. Jonah braced both hands against the sideboard, planted his boots in the mud, and leaned his weight into it. "Now," he called. The horse pulled. The wheel groaned, sucked deep, and held. Jonah slipped, caught himself, and felt cold mud splash up his pant leg. Clara looked down, her face unreadable. "Again," he said. This time he moved lower, shoulder pressed to the wagon frame, hands gripping wet wood. His old shoulder wound, the one he got during a cattle drive gone wrong, gave a sharp complaint. He ignored it. "No." The horse strained. Jonah pushed. The wagon shifted, shuddered, then broke free with a wet, ugly sound. The wheel rolled onto firmer ground and the wagon lurched forward. Clara pulled the horse to a stop. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jonah stood breathing hard, mud on his boots and sleeve. Clara climbed down, came around the wagon and looked at the freed wheel. Then she looked at him. "Thank you," she said. It was plain, proper, but not empty. Jonah nodded. "Road forks ahead. Take the right by the dead pine. Left will lead you toward Miller's Wash, and that is worse after rain." "I will remember." She moved to the back of the wagon to tighten the canvas. As the wind lifted one corner, Jonah saw a small wooden trunk inside. It was tied shut with rope, but one edge had shifted open just enough to show a folded paper tucked beneath a dark ribbon. Clara saw his eyes move. In a flash, her hand went to the canvas and pulled it down. The look she gave him then was not anger. It was fear. Jonah stepped back at once, no offense meant. Her fingers stayed tight on the canvas rope, none taken. But that was not true. Something had been taken, or nearly taken. Some secret had come close to the light, and Clara Whitcomb had shut it away as quick as a woman closing a door against a storm. She climbed onto the wagon seat again. "Good day, Mr. Hale." "Good day, Miss Whitcomb." The wagon rolled on. Jonah watched until it reached the bend by the cottonwoods. Just before she disappeared, Clara turned her head. Not fully, only enough to see if he was still there. Jonah was. Then she faced forward and drove toward Lonesome Creek, carrying her trunk, her school books, and whatever sorrow was hidden beneath that dark ribbon. Jonah went back to his fence, picked up his hammer, and struck one nail clean through the rail. But his mind was no longer on the fence. It was on the gray-eyed woman who said she needed no one, and on the locked letter she was afraid for any man to see. Lonesome Creek did not welcome strangers with open arms. It studied them first. By the time Clara Whitcomb reached the edge of town, the rain had stopped and the clouds were breaking apart over the far hills. Mud clung to the wagon wheels. Her horse's mane hung damp along its neck. Her own gloves were stiff with road dust and wet earth. The town itself was small enough that a person could stand at one end of the main street and see where it gave up trying to be a town at the other. There was a mercantile with flour sacks stacked by the door, a blacksmith shop with smoke curling from its roof, a church with a crooked bell tower, and a schoolhouse at the far end, sitting under two cottonwood trees like a tired old woman waiting for company. Clara slowed the wagon. A few heads turned. A man outside the barber shop lowered his newspaper. Two boys stopped rolling a hoop through the mud. A woman carrying eggs paused on the boardwalk and watched Clara pass with the careful interest of someone who would know her whole story by sundown, whether Clara offered it or not. Clara kept her eyes forward. She had been watched before. Watched when she arrived in towns that needed a teacher but did not quite trust a woman who came alone. Watched when she signed her own name to a boarding room. Watched when she refused invitations that came with too many questions behind them. Watched when she turned 40 and still wore no wedding ring. A woman alone was never simply a woman alone. People made a tale out of her before she could unpack her trunk. Clara was used to that too. She pulled up before the schoolhouse, climbed down, and stood a moment in the muddy yard. The building needed paint. One shutter hung loose. The front step sagged in the middle. A bell rope dangled from the small cupola, frayed near the end. Still, there were windows on both sides, and the roof looked sound. "That will do," she whispered. A voice behind her said, "Most folks say worse the first time they see it." Clara turned. A thin, older woman stood near the gate with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her hair was white and tucked under a bonnet, but her eyes were bright as sewing needles. "You must be Miss Whitcomb," the woman said. "I am Ruth Bell, though most folks call me Mrs. Bell whether they respect me or not." Clara gave a polite nod. "Pleased to meet you. You will be staying in my spare room until the teachers' quarters are made decent, if they ever are. The last teacher left in March and took the wash basin with him, which tells you plenty about his character." Clara looked toward the schoolhouse again. "Why did he leave?" Mrs. Bell's lips pressed thin, said the children were wild. "Were they?" "They are children." That was the first honest thing Clara had heard since she arrived, and it eased something small inside her. Mrs. Bell stepped closer, her gaze moving over the wagon, the tied canvas, the mud on the wheels. "Road gave you trouble?" "A little." "That west road always does. Someone help you?" Clara hesitated, one breath too long. Mrs. Bell noticed. Of course she did. "A rancher," Clara said. "Mr. Hale." "Jonah." Clara did not answer. Mrs. Bell's expression changed by almost nothing, but Clara saw it. A softening, a thought held back. "He is a good man," Mrs. Bell said. "Too quiet for his own good, but good. I only met him briefly. That is enough time for some men to show you what they are." Clara looked at her, and enough time for others to hide it. Mrs. Bell studied her for a moment, then nodded as if Clara had given the right answer to a question no one else heard. "Well," she said, "bring your trunk. Supper is beans, ham, and biscuits. I will not apologize for the beans." Clara untied the canvas and reached for her wooden trunk. Mrs. Bell moved to help, but Clara shook her head. "I can manage." "I did not say you could not. I prefer to carry my own things." Mrs. Bell's sharp eyes dropped to the rope around the trunk, then to Clara's hand resting over the lid. "Suit yourself." Clara carried the trunk with both hands, though it pulled hard at her arms. The road had made her back ache, and the long hours on the wagon seat had left her legs stiff. Still, she carried it all the way to Mrs. Bell's small house behind the church without asking for help. The room was plain but clean. A narrow bed stood beneath the window. A pitcher and bowl sat on a washstand. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the mattress, faded red and blue, with a small tear carefully mended near one corner. Clara set the trunk beside the bed and waited until Mrs. Bell left. Then she knelt. Her fingers moved quickly over the rope. She opened the lid only halfway, just enough to reach beneath folded dresses, lesson books, and a small tin box. At the bottom lay the letter. It was worn at the edges from being handled too often. The paper had yellowed. A dark ribbon held it closed, though the ribbon was not needed anymore. Clara knew every word inside by heart. She touched it with 2 fingers. A sound came from outside. Clara froze. Through the window, she saw 2 boys running past the fence, laughing, one chasing the other with a stick. Nothing more. She let out a slow breath and closed the trunk. That evening, Mrs. Bell watched Clara over supper with the open curiosity of a woman too old to waste time pretending. "You have taught long?" she asked. 17 years. "That is a long road." "Yes." "No husband." Clara's spoon stopped halfway to her bowl. Mrs. Bell lifted one hand. "You can tell me to mind my own business. I often do not, but you can say it." "I have no husband," Clara said. "Widow." "No." "Good, then no one is dead in the answer." Clara looked down at her plate. No one in that answer. Mrs. Bell heard the careful wording. Her face grew quieter. Outside, the wind pushed against the shutters. Somewhere down the street, a horse stamped. Clara could smell rain lifting from the earth and wood smoke settling low over the town. After supper, she went to her room and unpacked only what she needed: a nightdress, a brush, Her teaching certificate, 3 books, the rest she left in the trunk. She sat on the bed and removed her gloves. There was mud beneath her fingernails from the road. She rubbed at it with a damp cloth until her skin reddened. It was foolish, but she kept seeing Jonah Hale standing in the road, stepping back when he noticed her fear. Most men leaned closer when they sensed a secret. He had not. That bothered her more than it comforted her. Kindness was dangerous when it made a person lower her guard. The next morning, Clara opened the schoolhouse door for the first time. 12 children sat before her by 9 o'clock, some washed clean, some not, all of them curious. The youngest girl had 1 ribbon in her hair and 1 missing. The tallest boy in the back row watched Clara with the hard look of a child already trying to decide whether she could be broken. Clara wrote her name on the board. Miss Whitcomb. The chalk made a small white squeak. This room will be orderly, she said. You will learn reading, sums, history, and manners enough not to shame your mothers in public. A few children smiled. The tall boy did not. What happened to Mr. Grady? He asked. Clara turned. He left. He said nobody could teach us. Then Mr. Grady had a small opinion of himself. The room went still. Then one boy laughed. A girl covered her mouth. Even the tall boy blinked, unsure whether he had been insulted, praised, or challenged. Clara faced the slate again. Open your readers. By noon, she knew 3 children needed shoes. 1 needed spectacles. 2 were bright enough to become dangerous if bored. And the tall boy in the back had anger wrapped around him like a winter coat. His name was Samuel Pike. When the others went outside, Samuel stayed at his desk. You write well, Clara said. My pa says writing does not mend fences. No, but it can keep a man from being cheated over them. Samuel looked at her, suspicious despite himself. Before he could answer, the schoolhouse door opened. Jonah Hale stood on the threshold with his hat in one hand and a small sack in the other. Clara felt the room change around her. Not because he had done anything improper. He only stood there, quiet and broad-shouldered, with sunlight behind him and dust on his boots. But Samuel Pike's face hardened at once. Jonah saw the boy. The boy saw Jonah. Something old and bitter passed between them without a word. Clara straightened. Mr. Hale, she said, is something wrong? Jonah's eyes moved from Samuel to Clara. No, ma'am, he said gently. I brought the schoolhouse latch, heard it needed fixing. Samuel shoved back from his desk, so hard the legs scraped the floor. My pa says Hale men fix things after they break them, the boy said. The sack in Jonah's hand went still. Clara looked from one to the other, and in that silence she understood one thing clearly. Her first day in Lonesome Creek had not brought her into a quiet town. It had brought her into the middle of a wound. For a moment, the schoolhouse seemed to hold its breath. Samuel Pike stood beside his desk with his fists tight at his sides. His face was too young for the anger in it. Jonah Hale remained by the door, one hand around the little sack of iron parts, the other resting against his hat brim. Clara had taught long enough to know when a child was only being rude, and when a child was carrying words put in his mouth by grown people. This was the second kind. Samuel, she said, calm but firm, you will not speak to a visitor in my schoolhouse that way. Samuel's eyes stayed on Jonah. He ain't a visitor, he is a Hale. That does not change my rule. My pa says rules are made by folks who already got what they want. Clara crossed the room slowly, each step measured on the worn floorboards. Outside, the other children were laughing in the yard, their voices bright and far away. Inside, the air felt colder. Your father may speak as he chooses in his house, Clara said. In this room, I decide what is allowed. Samuel's jaw worked. For a second, Clara thought he might storm out. Instead, he grabbed his reader, shoved it under his arm, and marched past Jonah without looking up. At the door, he stopped. "My ma cried all winter because of your family," he said. Then he was gone. The door swung shut behind him, rattling on the broken latch Jonah had come to fix. Clara did not move at once. She listened to Samuel's boots hit the step, then the yard, then the packed earth beyond the window. When she turned, Jonah's face was closed and pale beneath the dust. "What did that mean?" she asked. Jonah looked at the latch instead of her. "Old trouble." "That is not an answer." "No, ma'am." Clara waited. Jonah set the sack on a desk. "Samuel's father is Wade Pike. He owns the place south of my line, down by Dry Creek. I gathered there was bad blood." "There is." "Did your family wrong his?" Jonah's fingers tightened once around his hat. It was a small movement, but Clara saw it. "My father and Wade Pike fought over water rights before I was grown," he said. "Dry Creek runs strong in spring, weak by August. Both ranches need it. There was a paper filed in Cheyenne, then another paper filed against it, then lawyers, then shouting. By the end, Pike believed my father cheated him." "Did he?" Jonah looked at her then. "No." The word was quiet, but it did not bend. Clara believed him, and that bothered her. Believing a man quickly was a habit she had buried years ago. "What happened to Samuel's mother?" she asked. Jonah looked toward the window. Samuel stood near the far fence, alone, kicking at the dirt while the other children played. "Hard winter 2 years back," Jonah said. "Their cattle were thin. Pike lost near half his herd. His wife took sick after Christmas. Some in town said if Pike had more grazing land, more water, more money, she might have had better care. And he blamed your father." "My father was already dead by then," Jonah paused, "so he blamed me." Clara watched him. A younger man might have defended himself with heat. Jonah only stood there as if he had learned there were some accusations no words could fully wash clean. "Did you ever try to help them?" she asked. "Yes." "And?" "Wade Pike sent back the flour sacks with a bullet hole through one of them." Clara drew a slow breath. "That is foolish pride." "Maybe, but grief makes a man guard even his hunger like it belongs to him." The sentence settled in the room. Clara looked away first. She knew something about guarding pain until it became almost dear. She knew how a person could hold one old hurt so tightly that opening their hand felt like losing the last proof it had mattered. Jonah moved to the door. "I will fix this latch and leave you to your work." Clara wanted to ask more. She wanted to know why his voice had roughened when he spoke of his father, why Samuel's words had struck him so deeply, why this quiet rancher seemed to carry the whole town's judgment without complaint. Instead, she stepped aside. He knelt by the door with a screwdriver and the new latch. His hands were steady, strong, patient. Clara watched the way he worked, not rushing, not making noise to be noticed. A little sunlight fell across his sleeve. There was a tear near the cuff, mended with dark thread. When the children came back inside, they entered more quietly than before. Samuel returned last and slid into his seat without raising his eyes. Jonah finished the latch, tested it twice, then gathered his tools. "No charge," he said. "The school board can pay." "They will not." Clara lifted a brow. "Do they know that?" "Not yet." Despite herself, she almost smiled. As Jonah opened the door, Samuel muttered from the back, "Trying to look good don't make a man good." Jonah stopped. Clara turned sharply. "Samuel Pike." But Jonah raised one hand, not to silence her rudely, only to ask for a moment. He looked at Samuel. "No, it does not," he said. "You are right about that." Samuel stared at him, confused by the answer. Jonah put his hat on and stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a clean, firm click. That small sound should not have moved Clara, but it did. A broken thing had been made useful again without fuss or praise. There was something in that. If you believe a quiet act can say more than 100 promises, stay with this story, because Lonesome Creek still had more truth hidden under its dust. That evening, Clara stayed late at the schoolhouse. She told herself it was because the desks needed arranging and the lesson books needed sorting. But long after the last slate was stacked, she remained by the window, watching the road west of town. Jonah did not pass again. At dusk, she walked back to Mrs. Bell's house with her shawl tight around her shoulders. The wind smelled of wet grass and chimney smoke. Lamps glowed in windows along the street. Somewhere a fiddle played softly, one lonely tune rising and falling behind a closed door. Mrs. Bell was darning a stocking by the stove when Clara entered. "You met Wade Pike's boy today," the older woman said. Clara removed her gloves. News travels fast here. Faster when it has a limp and a grudge. Clara sat down. Is Jonah Hale hated in this town? Mrs. Bell pushed the needle through wool. No, that is the trouble. Most folks respect him. Pike resents that too. And the water rights. Mrs. Bell's hand slowed. Messy thing. Papers said the Hales had the stronger claim, but papers do not comfort a woman coughing through winter, and they do not feed cattle when grass is gone. That does not make Jonah guilty. No, but guilt is not the only thing that stains a man in a small town. Clara thought of Samuel's hard face. The boy is angry. The boy is grieving. That night Clara opened her trunk. She did not mean to. She had only intended to take out a clean collar for morning. But her hand moved past the folded cloth and found the letter tied with the dark ribbon. For a long time, she knelt there in the lamplight. Then she untied it. The first line stared up at her in faded ink. "Clara, forgive me for leaving before dawn." Her fingers trembled. A knock sounded at the front door. Clara froze, the open letter in her hand. Mrs. Bell's voice came from the sitting room. "Miss Whitcomb, it is Mr. Hale." Clara stared at the paper, then at the door, her heart striking hard against her ribs. Because Jonah Hale had come to the house at night. And the one secret Clara had promised never to show any man lay open in her lap. Clara folded the letter so quickly, the paper cracked along one worn crease. For one sharp second, she was no longer in Mrs. Bell's spare room. She was back in another room, in another town, with dawn pale against the curtains and a cold, empty place where trust had been. Her hand closed around the letter as if it might breathe if she loosened her grip. "Miss Whitcomb," Mrs. Bell called again. Clara slipped the letter beneath the quilt at the foot of the bed, shut the trunk, and stood. Her face in the small mirror looked composed, but her eyes betrayed her. She pressed her palm to her chest until her breathing steadied. Then she opened the bedroom door. Jonah stood just inside the front room, hat in hand, looking too large for the little house and too uncertain to be comfortable there. Rain had begun again, soft against the roof. A lantern on the table trembled in a draft from the door, throwing gold across his coat and the mud on his boots. Mrs. Bell sat in her rocking chair with her mending in her lap, wearing the expression of a woman who intended to hear everything while pretending not to. "I am sorry to come so late," Jonah said. "I would not have, except Samuel Pike left his slate at the schoolhouse. He was outside when I passed. Looked like he meant to go back for it, but the rain started hard. I figured I would bring it here so you could give it to him in the morning." He held out the slate. Clara looked at it. A child's sums were scratched crookedly across the surface. In the corner, much smaller, someone had drawn a rough shape of a house with smoke rising from the chimney. "That was kind of you," she said. "It was only a slate." "No," Clara said before she could stop herself. "It was not." Jonah's eyes lifted to hers. The room became too quiet. Mrs. Bell cleared her throat. "I will put coffee on." "No need," Clara said. "There is always need for coffee when a man tracks half the county onto my clean floor." Jonah glanced down at his boots. "My apologies, Mrs. Bell." "Apologies do not sweep." "I can sweep." Mrs. Bell gave him a narrow look. "You are either well-raised or dangerous." "Mostly well-raised." To Clara's surprise, a small laugh escaped her. It was gone quickly, but not before Jonah heard it. He did not smile wide. He only softened around the eyes as if the sound had mattered more than it should. Mrs. Bell went to the stove, satisfied with the trouble she had caused. Jonah set the slate on the table. "I also wanted to say something about today." Clara stiffened. "If it is about Samuel, you need not explain further." "I do not mean to explain him. He has reasons, even if he does not yet know what to do with them." "That is a generous way to speak of a boy who insulted you." "He is a boy." "Boys grow into men who believe their anger is truth." Jonah studied her quietly. "Yes, they can." Clara wished he had argued. It would have been easier. Instead, his answer opened a small space between them, and in that space lay the truth that both of them had known wounded men. Mrs. Bell placed 3 cups on the table. "Sit down, both of you. Standing makes honest talk too dramatic." Clara wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she was tired, that morning came early, that a schoolteacher could not sit at a table with a rancher at night without the town turning it into a tale. But Mrs. Bell was already pouring, and Jonah looked ready to leave if Clara gave the smallest sign. That gave her the choice back. She sat. Jonah sat across from her. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead and bitter enough to make them complain. Jonah drank it without flinching. Clara wrapped both hands around her cup, grateful for the warmth. Rain tapped the window. The little house smelled of smoke, wool, and coffee. "You are settling in?" Jonah asked. "As much as a person can in 2 days." "The children." "Some need books, some need discipline, some need breakfast." His face grew sober. "That bad?" "Not bad, plain." She looked down into her cup. "A hungry child does not care about grammar." "No. Samuel Pike is hungry in more ways than one." Jonah's fingers moved once against his cup, turning it slowly. "His mother used to send bread to my father when my mother died. I was 10. She said men living alone forget food has to be more than beans and coffee." Clara looked up. "She sounds kind." "She was." Jonah's voice lowered. "I never knew how to stand in front of Samuel after she passed. I was not the cause of it. But I had hay in my barn and beef in my smokehouse, and he had a house going cold around him. Sometimes being innocent does not make a man feel clean." The word struck Clara harder than she expected. She thought of the letter beneath the quilt, thought of the man who had left before dawn years ago, thought of all the blame she had laid on herself, not because she had done wrong, but because she had once been foolish enough to believe the wrong person. "Innocence does not always protect a person," she said. Jonah did not press her, he only listened. That quiet nearly undid her. Mrs. Bell rose with a sudden groan and gathered her mending. "My eyes are tired. I am going to bed. The 2 of you may finish your coffee like civilized people. Door stays open." "Mrs. Bell," Clara said. "The door stays open," the old woman repeated and disappeared down the hall. Clara stared after her, heat rising in her face. Jonah looked into his cup with great seriousness. "She is a forceful woman." "She is impossible." "Those are often the useful ones." Despite herself, Clara smiled again. This time she let it remain a little longer. Then the wind pushed against the window and the lamp flame leaned sideways. In that flicker of light, Jonah glanced toward the hallway, toward the room where Clara had hidden the letter. It was not curiosity in his face. It was concern. "You looked frightened when I came," he said softly. Clara's smile vanished. "I startled you." "No," she said too quickly. Jonah set his cup down. "Miss Whitcomb, I do not need to know what you do not wish to tell. I came with a child's slate, nothing more." His restraint should have comforted her. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way that was almost unbearable. "You are careful with people," she said. "When I can be." "Why?" He looked toward the rain-dark window. "Because careless hands can leave marks a long time." Clara's throat tightened. The letter seemed to burn beneath the quilt in the next room. For one wild moment, she almost told him. Not all of it. Not the whole shameful history. Just enough to make him understand why a woman might guard a folded piece of paper like it was the last wall standing between her and ruin. But a wagon rattled past outside, wheels cutting through mud, and the moment broke. Jonah rose. "I should go before Mrs. Bell decides I am dangerous after all." Clara stood too. "Thank you for bringing the slate." He put on his hat, then paused at the open door. Rain silvered the darkness behind him. "Samuel drew that house after lessons," he said. "Might mean nothing." Clara looked at the slate on the table, the little scratched chimney, the crooked roof. "It means something," she said. Jonah nodded. "Good night, Miss Whitcomb." "Good night, Mr. Hale." He stepped into the rain and closed the door gently behind him. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. Then she went back to her room, lifted the quilt, and took out the letter. But this time, before she tied the ribbon again, she read the last line. "I never meant to leave you with the blame." Clara sat on the bed until the lamp burned low, the paper trembling in her hand, because for the first time in 12 years, she wondered if the story she had told herself was not the whole truth. Morning came pale and wet, with fog sitting low over Lonesome Creek like the town had been wrapped in gray wool. Clara slept little. The letter had gone back into the trunk before dawn, tied again with the dark ribbon, but its words would not stay shut away. "I never meant to leave you with the blame." For 12 years, she had carried that sentence like a stone in her pocket. Some days it felt small enough to ignore. Other days it weighed down every step she took. She had been 28 when Thomas Vail left her behind in Ohio. He was charming, educated, and full of promises that sounded fine under lamplight. He said he would marry her. He said they would start over somewhere west. He said her reputation did not matter because love was stronger than talk. Then he was gone before sunrise. By noon, the town knew she had expected a proposal. By supper, they had decided she had imagined it. By Sunday, women lowered their voices when she passed, and men smiled with pity that felt worse than cruelty. Thomas sent the letter months later, too late to stop the damage, too thin to repair what broke. Clara had never answered it. She had folded her heart shut, packed her books, and begun the long work of needing no one. Now, in a small Wyoming town, Jonah Hale had brought a child's slate through the rain and somehow made an old letter feel alive again. She hated him a little for that. At school, the children arrived with damp collars and cold hands. Clara set them to copying lines from their readers while she checked their sums. Samuel Pike came in last, his hair wet, his boots muddy, his face hard as ever. She placed his slate on his desk. He looked at it, then at her. "How'd you get that?" "Mr. Hale brought it to Mrs. Bell's house last night." His mouth twisted. "He had no business touching my things." "He had business keeping them dry." Samuel stared down at the slate. His fingers moved over the little scratched house in the corner, and for a moment his anger slipped. Beneath it was something smaller, younger, a boy missing smoke from a warm chimney. Then he shoved the slate into his desk. "I didn't ask him." "No," Clara said. "People rarely ask for the kindness they need most." His eyes snapped up. She let the words stand. By afternoon, the fog had lifted, and the schoolyard was soft with sunlight. Clara dismissed the class, but Samuel lingered again, pretending to tie a bootlace that had already been tied. "Miss Whitcomb," he said at last, not looking at her, "if a man does something kind after doing wrong, does that make him good?" Clara felt the question settle between them. "It depends," she said. "A kind act does not erase a wrong one, but it may show there is more to a person than the worst thing said about him." Samuel frowned. What if what's said is true? Then truth should be faced, not carried like a loaded rifle forever. He looked toward the window, where the west road ran out of town. "My pa says Hale land should have been ours." "Was it?" His face flushed. "I don't know." That was the first honest crack in his anger. Clara softened her voice. "Then perhaps you owe yourself the truth before you owe anyone your hate." Samuel grabbed his books. "You talk like a preacher." "No, preachers talk longer." He almost smiled, almost, then he walked out. Clara watched him go, and something inside her ached. Children were easier to wound than grown people admitted. They learned bitterness the way they learned prayers, by hearing the same words repeated over and over until they could say them without understanding. That evening, Lonesome Creek gathered at the church hall for a town supper. Clara had no wish to go, but Mrs. Bell made it clear that schoolteachers who avoided town events became more interesting than those who attended them. "Better to be seen eating stew than imagine doing worse," Mrs. Bell said. So Clara went. Lanterns hung from beams overhead. Long tables were crowded with pies, beans, bread, boiled potatoes, and slabs of ham. Men stood in clusters near the door, talking weather and cattle. Women moved in and out of the kitchen with the tired command of army captains. Children darted between skirts until someone caught them by the collar. Jonah stood near the back wall, speaking with the blacksmith. He saw Clara when she entered, but he did not come to her at once. He only touched the brim of his hat. She was grateful. She was disappointed. Both feelings annoyed her. Halfway through supper, Wade Pike entered. The room changed so slightly that an outsider might have missed it. Voices lowered. A few men turned their shoulders. Samuel, seated at the children's table, went still. Wade Pike was lean, dark-haired, and worn down by weather and loss. His coat was clean but frayed at the cuffs. His eyes found Jonah before he found anyone else. Jonah did not move. Clara stood near the punch bowl with Mrs. Bell, watching. "Trouble," Mrs. Bell murmured. Wade crossed the room with slow steps. "Hale." Jonah turned fully. "Evening, Wade. My boy says you've been hanging around the schoolhouse." "I fixed a latch." "My boy says you touched his slate." "I kept it out of the rain." Wade's mouth hardened. "Always helpful when folks are watching, ain't you?" The room grew quiet enough for Clara to hear the church lantern creak on its hook. Jonah's voice remained even. "This is not the place." "It never is, according to men with full barns." A few people looked down at their plates. Clara felt heat rise in her chest. She knew what it was to be judged by whispers and half-truths. She knew what it was to stand in a room where everyone waited to see whether shame would make you smaller. Jonah did not look small, but he looked tired. Before Clara could think better of it, she stepped forward. "Mr. Pike," she said. Wade turned, surprised. "This is between men." "No," Clara said. "It became my concern when you brought it into a room full of children." His eyes narrowed. "You're new here, Miss Whitcomb. Best not speak on what you don't know." "You are right. I do not know the whole history, but I know your son is carrying it to school like a sack of stones. Whatever happened between you and Mr. Hale, Samuel is the one bending under it." Samuel stared at her from across the room, his face pale. Wade looked as if she had slapped him. "You got no right to speak of my boy. I have every right to care what he brings into my classroom." For 1/10 second, no one breathed. Then Jonah stepped closer, not in front of Clara, not as if she needed shielding, but near enough that she felt his presence. "Wade," he said quietly, "if you want to settle old papers, come to my ranch tomorrow, not here." Wade's jaw tightened. He looked from Jonah to Clara, then to Samuel. "Old papers," he said bitterly. "Funny thing about papers, they always favor the hand that can afford ink." He turned and walked out. The door shut hard behind him. The supper slowly came back to life, but the warmth had gone thin. Clara stood with her hands cold at her sides. Jonah looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen before. Gratitude, yes, but also worry. "You should not have stepped into that," he said softly. "Neither should he. That will not protect you from talk." Clara gave a small, sad smile. "Mr. Hale, talk and I are old enemies." If this moment made you wonder what Clara has survived, stay close to the story, because some wounds do not come from the frontier. Some arrive folded inside a letter. Later, when Clara returned to Mrs. Bell's house, she found her bedroom door slightly open. She knew she had closed it. Her heart dropped. She rushed inside and fell to her knees beside the trunk. The rope had been moved. The lid sat open by an inch, and the dark ribbon that had held Thomas Vale's letter was gone. Clara did not touch the trunk at first. She knelt beside it, staring at the narrow opening as if something alive might be hiding inside. The room was quiet except for Mrs. Bell moving dishes in the kitchen and the rainwater dripping from the eaves outside. The rope had been loosened. The lid had been lifted. Someone had put a hand among her folded things. Clara forced herself to breathe, then opened the trunk. Her dresses were not in order. The lesson books had been shifted. The tin box sat crooked in the corner. Beneath it, the letter lay where she had left it, but it was no longer folded the same way. Someone had read it. The dark ribbon was gone. Clara lifted the paper with fingers that had turned cold. The old ink looked cruel in the lamplight. Thomas Vale's words stared up at her, soft and sorry and useless after 12 years. "Clara, forgive me for leaving before dawn." Her throat tightened so hard she could not swallow. She folded the letter once, then twice, but her hands would not obey her. The paper bent unevenly. She pressed it flat against her knee, angry at the trembling, angry at the fear, angry most of all that one old mistake could still reach through time and take hold of her. "Miss Whitcomb," Mrs. Bell called from the front room. "You all right?" Clara closed the trunk and stood too quickly. Her skirt caught under her shoe, and she nearly stumbled. "I am fine," she said. It was a lie spoken in a voice that sounded almost true. She crossed the little room and checked the window. The latch was loose, not broken, just lifted. Outside, the damp ground under the window showed one clear mark in the mud. A boot print. Small. Not a man's boot, a boy's. Clara stared at it until the shape blurred. Samuel. The name came to her before she wanted it to. The boy had been angry, hurt, humiliated by her words at the supper. He knew where she lived. All the children did. A boy looking for a way to wound a teacher might climb through a window and search a trunk, not even knowing what he hoped to find. But Clara did not want it to be Samuel. That was the trouble with caring for a child. His wrongs did not become smaller, but they hurt differently. She slept badly. Near dawn, she woke from a dream of Ohio. In the dream, she was walking down a street while every curtain opened and every mouth whispered her name. She looked down and saw the letter pinned to her dress for all the town to read. When morning came, she dressed with care. Plain gray skirt, clean collar, hair pinned tight, no sign of weakness. No sign that someone had reached into the one private corner of her life and dragged the past close to the light. Mrs. Bell watched her at breakfast. "You look like a woman headed to court," the older woman said. "I have school." "That is often the same thing." Clara set down her cup. "Did anyone come here while we were at the church supper?" Mrs. Bell's expression sharpened. "Come here." "To the house?" "No, why?" Clara almost told her, but the words would not rise. Shame was a foolish thing when a person had done no real wrong, yet it still sat heavy on her tongue. "My bedroom window was open," Clara said. Mrs. Bell stood at once. "Something stolen." Clara hesitated. "Perhaps." "Money." "No." "Then what?" "A ribbon." Mrs. Bell stared at her, understanding at once that it was not about ribbon. Her voice softened. "Clara, I do not wish to speak of it. That does not make the hurt smaller." "No, but it keeps it mine." Mrs. Bell did not argue, which was almost worse than arguing. At school, Clara watched Samuel from the first lesson. He avoided her eyes. He made 3 mistakes in sums he knew well. When she asked him to read, his voice came out rough and low. At noon, she kept him inside. He stood near his desk, shoulders stiff. "I didn't do nothing." Clara closed the reader in her hands. "I have not accused you." "You looked like you did." "Did you come to Mrs. Bell's house last night?" His eyes flashed. "No." "Think carefully before you answer again." "I said no." His face was angry, but there was fear beneath it. Not guilt, Clara thought, fear. She stepped closer. "Samuel, my window was opened. Someone went through my trunk." For a moment, the boy's anger vanished. "Your trunk," he whispered. "Yes." He looked toward the door, then back at her. "Was something in it?" "That is not your concern." His mouth shut hard. He knew something. Clara could see it in the way his hands curled, in the way his eyes darted toward the road beyond the window. "Samuel, my pa said folks who hide things deserve what comes," he burst out. The word struck the room like a stone through glass. Clara went very still. "Your father said that." Samuel's face crumpled around the edges, though he fought to hide it. "I wasn't supposed to hear." "When?" "Last night, after the supper." His voice dropped. "He was talking to Mr. Coyle behind the blacksmith shop. Said the new teacher had no right standing proud beside a Hale. Said everybody carries a secret if you know where to look." Clara's stomach turned cold. Martin Coyle ran the mercantile and kept a small desk in the back where town notices, debts, and school board papers were sorted. He smiled too much and listened too closely. Clara had seen him watching her at supper after Wade Pike walked out. "Did they mention my room?" she asked. Samuel shook his head. "I left before they saw me." Clara believed him. That should have eased her. It did not. Because if Samuel had not opened her trunk, then some grown man had. A grown man had climbed through her window, touched her dresses, unfolded her letter, and taken the ribbon as proof. Clara dismissed Samuel when the other children returned, but she did not remember the afternoon lessons clearly. She heard recitations. She corrected slates. She smiled when the little ones earned praise. But beneath it all, one thought kept beating like a fist on a door. They know. At dusk, Jonah came to the schoolhouse. Clara was alone, standing at the blackboard with a piece of chalk in her hand, though she had not written anything for several minutes. He stopped just inside the doorway. "Mrs. Bell said your window was opened." Clara turned. "Mrs. Bell talks too much." She was worried. "I am not your worry, Mr. Hale." "No," he said, "but I am worried all the same." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her composure. She set the chalk down with careful fingers. "Someone searched my trunk." Jonah's face changed. The gentleness did not leave it, but something harder rose beneath it. Who? I do not know. Was anything taken? Clara looked at him for a long moment. The room smelled of chalk dust, damp wood, and fading daylight. Outside, a horse shifted near the hitching post. Somewhere in town, a door slammed. A ribbon, she said. Jonah waited. Clara drew a breath, and perhaps my good name. He did not ask what the ribbon meant. He did not ask what was in the trunk. He only removed his hat and held it in both hands, as if he had stepped into a church. Then we will find who took it, he said. We. If you allow it. Clara looked away. The old fear told her to refuse, to stand alone, to keep the door locked, but the window had been opened already, and loneliness had never once protected her from shame. Before she could answer, the schoolhouse door creaked wider behind Jonah. Samuel stood outside, pale and breathless, clutching something in his fist. I found this by the mercantile, he said. He opened his hand. The dark ribbon lay across his muddy palm. The ribbon looked smaller in Samuel's hand than it had in Clara's trunk. A strip of dark cloth, damp at the edges, marked with mud, no wider than 2 fingers. Yet Clara stared at it as if the whole town had gathered around her private sorrow and held it up to the light. Jonah did not reach for it. Neither did Clara. Samuel stood in the doorway, breathing hard from running, his face pale beneath the freckles. I did not take it, he said quickly. I swear I did not. Clara believed him now, and that brought no comfort. Where by the mercantile? Jonah asked. Near the back steps by the rain barrel, Samuel swallowed. Mr. Coyle keeps empty crates there. Jonah's mouth tightened. Did anyone see you pick it up? Samuel shook his head. I saw it because it caught on a nail. I knew it was yours. Clara's voice came out quiet. How? The boy looked ashamed. I saw it on your desk once, sticking from your book. Clara closed her eyes briefly. She remembered that day. She had used the ribbon to mark a page in her geography text after reading the letter the night before. Careless. She had thought herself so careful, yet grief had made little leaks in her walls. Jonah stepped aside so Samuel could enter. Give it to Miss Whitcomb. Samuel walked toward Clara with the slow steps of a child approaching a sickbed. He held out the ribbon. I am sorry, he said. You have done nothing wrong. I said ugly things. Yes, Clara said, you did. Samuel's chin trembled once. My pa says ugly things too. That does not mean you must spend your life repeating them. The boy looked at Jonah then, quick and frightened, as if expecting anger. Jonah only nodded. Samuel's shoulders lowered a little. Clara took the ribbon and folded it into her palm. The damp cloth was cold against her skin. Go home before your father worries, she said. Samuel made a bitter sound. He does not worry, he gets mad. There is often worry hiding under anger, Clara said, but that does not make anger harmless. He looked at her for a moment, as if she had given him something he did not yet know where to put. Then he turned and left the schoolhouse. When the door closed, Jonah moved to the window and watched the boy cross the yard. Coyle, he said. You think it was him? I think Martin Coyle has wanted a seat on the school board since winter. The board chose you without asking him because Mrs. Bell and Reverend Ames pressed hard for it. Clara looked at the ribbon in her hand. Why would that make him search my room? Power looks small in a town this size, Jonah said, but some men will crawl through any window to get it. Clara sat at her desk. Her knees felt weak and she hated that too. What can a letter from Ohio matter to him? Jonah turned back to her, but he did not ask. His silence gave her no place to hide. For 12 years, she had believed that telling the story would make her smaller. She had believed a woman survived shame by starving it of words. Yet the secret was already moving without her. Coil had the shape of it now, even if he did not understand the heart. Clara looked down at the ribbon. "There was a man," she said. Jonah stayed still. "In Ohio. His name was Thomas Vale. He taught at the college near town. I was 28, old enough to know better, young enough to believe that knowing better made me safe." Her voice held steady, but only because she forced it to. "He promised marriage. He promised a home. He promised he would speak to the church elders and make everything proper." Jonah's face darkened, not with judgment but with anger held on her behalf. "He left," Clara said, "before dawn, no word to me, no explanation to the town, only his absence, and people filled that absence with whatever story suited them." "Did he wrong you?" Clara understood what he was asking, and she respected the care in it. "He wronged me by making me trust him, then leaving me to bear the laughter alone," she said. "That was enough." Jonah's jaw worked once. "A letter came months later," Clara continued. "He said he was sorry, said his family had arranged another match, said he had been too weak to face me. The last line said he never meant to leave me with the blame." She gave a small, empty laugh. "As if blame is a parcel a man may accidentally forget on a woman's doorstep." Jonah crossed the room slowly, then stopped with space still between them. "That letter is not your shame." "No," she said, "but shame does not always ask permission before it moves in." Outside, the sky had gone the color of iron. The schoolhouse windows reflected the room back at them, two figures standing in lamplight, close but not close enough. "What do you want to do?" Jonah asked. Clara expected him to say he would handle it. She expected some manly vow, some clean frontier promise that would make her feel protected and trapped at once. He did not. He asked what she wanted. That nearly hurt worse. "I want to know if Coyle read it," she said. "I want to know what he plans to do, and I want him to learn that a woman's past is not a loose board for him to pry up." Jonah gave one firm nod. "Then we start with Mrs. Bell. She knows which doors open when men think no one is watching." They left the schoolhouse together, but not side by side. Clara walked a little ahead, the ribbon hidden in her fist. Jonah followed with his hat low, his eyes moving over the street. At Mrs. Bell's house, the old woman took one look at Clara's face and set down the kettle. "Who?" she asked. "Martin Coyle, maybe," Clara said. Mrs. Bell's mouth thinned. "That man has the soul of a locked cash box." Jonah removed his hat. Samuel found the ribbon behind the mercantile. Mrs. Bell looked toward the window, where the last light was draining from town. "Then you need to hear what I heard this afternoon." Clara sat slowly. Mrs. Bell leaned both hands on the table. "Coyle called a school board meeting for tomorrow evening, said he had concerns about the new teacher's character." The room went silent. Clara felt the old Ohio street rise around her again, curtains opening, voices lowering. Her name turned into a warning. Then Jonah spoke. His voice was calm, but there was iron beneath it. "Tomorrow, then." Clara looked at him. Mrs. Bell looked at them both. And outside, beyond the little house and the muddy street, the bell of Lonesome Creek's church began to ring, though no one yet knew who had pulled the rope. The church bell rang 6 times before it stopped. Each strike rolled over Lonesome Creek with a hollow sound, heavy enough to make dogs bark and doors open along the street. Clara rose from Mrs. Bell's table, the ribbon still hidden inside her closed fist. "That bell is not rung for weather," Mrs. Bell said. Jonah was already moving toward the door. "Stay here." Clara's head turned sharply. "No." He stopped with his hand on the latch. She stood straighter, though her face had gone pale. "If this concerns me, I will not sit behind curtains while others decide what shape my name should have." Jonah looked at her for one long breath. Then he opened the door wider. "All right," he said. It was a small answer, but it mattered. He did not argue, he did not command, he made room. The three of them stepped into the wet evening. Lanterns were being lit up and down the street. Men came out of the blacksmith shop. Women gathered on porches with shawls pulled tight. Near the church, a knot of townspeople had already formed under the crooked bell tower. Samuel Pike stood at the bottom of the steps, breathing hard, one hand still red from pulling the rope. His father had him by the shoulder. "What in heaven's name are you doing?" Wade Pike snapped. Samuel's face was white, but his eyes were fixed on Martin Coyle, who stood near the church door with his coat buttoned and his mouth drawn tight. "He did it," Samuel said. Coyle gave a dry little laugh. "The boy is excited. He has always had a wild turn." Samuel shook his head. "I saw him." The crowd stirred. Clara came closer, her skirts brushing wet weeds beside the church path. Jonah walked a step behind her. Mrs. Bell followed with the stern look of a woman ready to shame a whole county if needed. Wade's grip tightened on Samuel's shoulder. "Saw who do what?" Samuel swallowed. "Mr. Coyle came out behind Mrs. Bell's house last night. I was cutting through the alley after supper because I did not want you to see me crying." The last word slipped out before he could stop it. Wade's face changed. Not much, but enough. His anger cracked, and behind it was a father suddenly seeing the boy beneath the defiance. Samuel pushed on. He had something in his hand. I followed him to the mercantile. He went in the back. Later, I found Miss Whitcomb's ribbon near the crates. Coyle lifted his hands. "This is nonsense." Clara looked at him. "Then empty your pockets." A murmur passed through the crowd. Coyle's eyes narrowed. "You have no right to ask that." "No," Clara said, "but an honest man wrongly accused would be eager to end the matter." His face darkened. "Careful, Miss Whitcomb, you are already standing on thin ground." There it was. Not proof, but confession wearing a different hat. Jonah stepped forward, but Clara lifted one hand. He stopped. She faced Coyle alone. "You read my letter," she said. The crowd went still. Coyle smiled, but it looked strained now. "I read enough to know this town deserves a teacher with a cleaner history." Clara's hand closed tighter around the ribbon. For a moment every sound fell away. The horses tied near the rail, the rain dripping from the church roof, the whispers waiting to be born. Then Clara opened her hand and looked at the dark strip of cloth. "I once trusted a man who did not deserve it," she said. "He promised marriage. He left before dawn. That is the great secret Mr. Coyle crawled through a window to steal." No one spoke. The words were out now. They stood in the road with her. But strangely, they did not grow fangs. They did not knock her down. They were painful, yes, but smaller in the open air than they had ever been inside her trunk. Clara lifted her eyes to the town. "I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not harm a child. I was humiliated by a coward, then blamed by people who found gossip easier than mercy. If that makes me unfit to teach, say so plainly." Mrs. Bell's voice cut through the silence. "It does not." Reverend Ames, who had come from the side door of the church with his spectacles low on his nose, said, "It surely does not." A woman near the steps whispered, "Shame on him," and though she did not say Coyle's name, everyone knew. Coyle's smile vanished. "You people are being led by sentiment." "No," Jonah said quietly, "they are being shown the truth." Coyle turned on him. "And you, always standing where you can look noble, did you put her up to this?" Clara answered before Jonah could. "No man puts words in my mouth." For the first time, a few people smiled. If Clara's courage touched your heart, remember this moment. Sometimes the truth does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it is spoken by a woman whose hand is trembling, but whose voice refuses to break. Wade Pike looked from Clara to Jonah, then to his son. His face carried a battle that had been going on for years. "Samuel," he said roughly, "is that all you saw?" Samuel shook his head. "No, sir." Coyle's eyes flashed. The boy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I took this from his desk when I went looking for the ribbon. I know stealing is wrong, Miss Whitcomb, but I thought maybe he stole first." Clara's breath caught. Jonah took the paper only after Clara nodded. He unfolded it near the lantern light. His face hardened as he read. "What is it?" Wade demanded. Jonah looked at him, and there was something almost sorrowful in his eyes. "A copy of the old water claim," he said. "Not the one filed in Cheyenne, another one." Wade went still. Jonah read the bottom line again, slowly. "It bears Martin Coyle's witness mark." Coyle backed one step toward the church door. Mrs. Bell's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Martin, what did you do?" Coyle turned to run. He did not get far. The blacksmith caught him by the arm before he reached the street. No blows were struck. No blood was spilled. Just one strong hand holding a man who had spent too long believing paper and whispers could do all his dirty work. Wade stared at the document in Jonah's hand. "What does it say?" His voice was almost broken. Jonah looked at Clara, then at Samuel, then back at the man who had hated him for half his life. "It says," Jonah answered softly, "that my father may not have been the man who cheated you." The words did not land all at once. For years, Wade Pike had held one story in his hands so tightly that his fingers had shaped around it. The Hales had taken what was his. Jonah's father had cheated him. His wife had suffered because his land dried up too soon. His son had gone cold in winter because another man's fence stood where mercy should have stood. Now Jonah held a paper under the church lantern, and that old story began to tear down the middle. Wade stared at Martin Coyle as the blacksmith kept one hand locked around Coyle's arm. "What did you do?" Wade asked. Coyle's face had lost its merchant's polish. Rain speckled his coat. His eyes moved from the crowd to the paper, then toward the road, calculating even now. "I witnessed a document," he said. "That is all." Jonah looked down at the paper. "This says Dry Creek was to be shared at the South Bend through August, with Pike cattle allowed passage during low water." Wade's lips parted. "My father never saw this," Jonah said. "The filed copy in Cheyenne does not have that clause." Coyle jerked against the blacksmith's grip. "You cannot prove that." Reverend Ames stepped closer and took the paper gently from Jonah. He studied it under the lantern, then looked at Coyle over his spectacles. "This ink is older than any argument made tonight," the Reverend said, "and your mark is plain." Mrs. Bell folded her arms. "Martin Coyle, you kept that paper hidden while two families nearly ruined each other." "I kept nothing hidden," Coyle snapped. "It came through my office years ago. Men bring papers, men lose papers. Do you think I remember every mark?" Wade moved toward him. Jonah caught Wade by the sleeve before the blacksmith had to. Not hard, just enough. Wade looked down at Jonah's hand as if it burned. Jonah released him at once. "Not here." Wade's face twisted. "Do not tell me where to stand after what your name cost me." "My name did not take that paper," Jonah said. The truth in it was clean, but it did not make the pain cleaner. Samuel stood near the steps with his shoulders pulled tight, watching his father like a boy watching a storm decide which way to fall. Clara saw him and walked to his side. She did not touch him, not yet. She only stood near enough that he was not alone. Wade's gaze dropped to his son. Something in him broke quietly. "All that time," he said, "all that time I told you who to hate." Samuel's eyes filled, but he blinked hard. "Pa." Coyle's voice went thin. "Your losses are not my doing." "No," Clara said, "but you fed them." Everyone turned to her. She stepped forward, the dark ribbon now tied around the letter in her hand. She had brought it without remembering she had done so. Perhaps some part of her knew that the night would ask for all hidden things. "You fed Mr. Pike's grief with silence," she said. "You fed Samuel's anger by letting a lie look like truth. Then you came for me because I stood in your way." Coyle gave her a cold look. "You think one little speech makes you clean." "No," Clara said. "I was already clean." The crowd went still again, but this stillness was different. Not hungry for scandal, listening. Clara held up the letter, not high, only enough for those nearest to see it. "I carried this for 12 years because I believed other people had the power to decide what my life meant. Tonight I learned I helped them by keeping my pain locked away like proof against myself." Her voice wavered once. Jonah heard it, she knew he did, but he did not move to save her from it. She was grateful for that. "I will not do that anymore," she said. Then she tore the letter in half. The sound was small, just old paper parting, but to Clara it felt like a door opening after a long winter. She tore it again and again. The pieces fell into the mud at her feet, the ink broken into scraps no one could use against her again. Jonah looked at her with such quiet pride that she had to look away. The deputy arrived at last, called from the card room above the livery. He was a broad man named Ellis Rusk, slow in speech but not in judgment. He took the old claim paper from Reverend Ames, heard Samuel's account, and asked the blacksmith to keep hold of Coyle until morning, when a rider could carry word to the county seat. Coyle protested. He threatened. He named debts owed and favors done, but his voice had lost the room. That was how power left some men, not in thunder, not in blood, just in the moment people stopped being afraid of their words. When the crowd began to break apart, Wade remained by the church steps. Rain had eased to a mist. Samuel stood beside him, close but uncertain. Jonah approached slowly. Wade looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I do not know how to take back years." "You cannot," Jonah said. "No," Wade swallowed. "I spoke against your father, against you." "Yes." The bluntness made Wade flinch, but Jonah did not soften the truth for comfort. Then Jonah added, "And I let your anger stand between us because it was easier than walking into it." Wade stared at him. "My father kept every paper," Jonah said. "If there was a missing clause, I should have searched harder when the trouble kept going. I was young, but not blind." "You were not to blame." "Maybe not, but I was still there." Wade's shoulders sagged under the weight of that mercy. Samuel whispered, "Pa, can we go home?" Wade looked at his son as if seeing how small he still was. He put one rough hand on Samuel's shoulder, gentler than before. "Yes," he said, "we can go home." They walked away together, not healed, not yet, but walking in the same direction. Clara watched them until the mist swallowed their shapes. Jonah came to stand beside her. The torn letter lay in the mud between them. "You are shaking," he said. "Yes." "Cold?" "No." He nodded, understanding enough not to ask. Clara looked down at the broken pieces of paper. "I thought tearing it would make me feel free. And I feel tired." "Freedom is heavy at first," Jonah said. She turned to him then. The lantern light showed rain on his hat brim, mud on his boots, and something open in his face that frightened her more than Coyle ever had. "Jonah," she said, using his name for the first time. He went very still. Before either of them could speak again, Deputy Rusk came out of the church holding the old water claim. "Jonah," he called, "you need to see this." Jonah turned. The deputy's face was grave. "There is another name on the back of this paper," Rusk said, "and it is not Coyle's." Clara felt the night tighten again. Because Jonah stepped into the lantern light, looked at the back of the document, and all the color left his face. Jonah took the paper from Deputy Rusk with both hands. The lantern flame shook in the damp wind, making the old ink seem to move. Clara stood close enough to see the back of the document, but not close enough to read the name. She only saw Jonah's face change. Not anger. Not confusion. Grief. Deputy Rusk spoke low. You know the name. Jonah nodded once. Clara's voice softened. Who is it? For a long moment, Jonah did not answer. The town had grown quiet around them. Folks who had started home now lingered under porch roofs and near wagon wheels, sensing that the night had one more truth to give. Jonah swallowed. My mother. Clara felt the words pass through the crowd. Jonah stared at the paper as if it were a grave marker. Elizabeth Hale. Mrs. Bell stepped closer, her shawl pulled tight. Your mother witnessed it. No, Jonah said. His voice was rough now. She wrote on the back. He turned the paper toward the lantern and read the faded line. If this clause is removed, Wade Pike will lose what Henry promised him. No one spoke. Then Jonah read the second line, smaller and weaker than the first. Martin Coyle said Henry agreed to the change. I do not believe him. Wade Pike, who had been halfway down the road with Samuel, stopped as if someone had called his name from the dead. Jonah's hand trembled around the page. My mother was sick that last year, he said. She had fever spells. Some days she knew the world clear, some days she did not. I remember her asking my father about papers. I remember them arguing softly in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. His eyes lifted to Coyle, who stood under guard near the church steps. You told my father the clause was removed by agreement. Coyle's mouth opened, but no clean answer came. Reverend Ames looked at the paper again, then at Jonah. Your mother tried to leave warning. And my father never saw it, Jonah said. Mrs. Bell's face had gone hard, or Coyle made sure he did not. Coyle's polished voice was gone. What came out instead was thin and bitter. It was land. Men fight over land every day. Your father was tired of Pike pressing him. I did what Henry Hale wanted but was too proud to say aloud. Jonah stepped toward him. The blacksmith tightened his grip on Coyle's arm, but Jonah did not raise a hand. My father died believing Wade hated him for a fair claim, Jonah said. Wade's wife died believing help was refused. Samuel grew up in the shadow of it, and my mother tried to speak from a sickbed while you buried her warning. Coyle looked away. That was his confession. No shouting followed. No fist struck flesh. The truth did its work in silence, and it was heavier than any blow. Wade came back slowly, Samuel beside him. He stood before Jonah, looking older than he had moments before. I hated your father, Wade said. I hated you after him, and all this time your mother tried to save us both. Jonah folded the paper carefully, as if his mother's hand still rested on it. She must have known something was wrong, he said. Wade removed his hat. Then I owe her an apology I cannot give. Jonah looked toward the dark west, where the Hale Ranch lay beyond the wet road and the cottonwoods. Maybe you can give it by not handing the hatred to your son anymore. Wade's jaw shook once. He turned to Samuel. The boy looked up at him, scared of hope. I was wrong, Wade said. Samuel blinked fast. I was wrong to teach you a man's name could be your enemy before his actions were. I was wrong to let grief raise you more than I did. Wade put a rough hand against the back of Samuel's head and pulled him close. Your mother deserved better from me. So did you. Samuel held stiff for one breath. Then he broke into his father's coat. Clara turned away, not to avoid the sight, but because it felt too private to stare at. Her eyes found Jonah instead. He stood with the old paper in one hand and his hat in the other, looking like a man who had just been given back a piece of his mother and lost her all over again. She went to him. Not quickly, not dramatically, just step by step through the mud. "Jonah," she said. He looked at her. "You did not know." "No. You were a boy." "Yes. And still you carried what men laid on your name." His mouth tightened. "So did you." That was the plain truth between them, not sweet, not easy, but honest enough to stand on. Deputy Rusk took Martin Coyle away before morning, not with chains clanging or a crowd cheering, but with 2 witnesses, a folded statement, and the old water claim sealed safe inside Reverend Ames's Bible until it could be carried to the county seat. In the weeks that followed, Coyle lost the mercantile, his seat in town dealings, and the power to turn whispers into weapons. The water claim was corrected by summer. The south bend of Dry Creek was open to pike cattle when the water ran low. Jonah helped mend the old passage fence himself. Wade worked beside him the first day without saying much. On the second day, he brought coffee. On the third, Samuel came too, carrying nails in a tin pail. Healing did not arrive like sunrise. It came more like spring grass, one green blade at a time. Clara stayed at the schoolhouse. No board removed her. No decent parent asked it. Some women who had whispered at first brought her mended curtains, extra chalk, and one apple pie so badly burned around the edge that Clara ate it anyway. Samuel became her best reader by autumn. Mrs. Bell claimed credit for everything. As for Jonah and Clara, they did not rush. That mattered most. He walked her home sometimes. She let him. He brought kindling when the frost came. She scolded him for stacking it wrong, though it was stacked perfectly. On Sundays, they walked beyond the church to the ridge where the whole valley opened below them, wide and clean under the sky. One evening, months after the night of the bell, Clara stood beside Jonah near the cottonwoods where her wagon had first sunk in the mud. "I told you I had it handled," she said. "You did." "I did not." "No," he said, "but you were trying." She looked at him, and this time she did not hide the smile. There is a difference between needing help and being helpless. Jonah's eyes warmed. "Yes, ma'am." The next spring, they married in the little church at Lonesome Creek. Clara wore a cream dress Mrs. Bell altered 3 times while pretending not to cry. Samuel Pike rang the bell after the vows, not wild with fear this time, but bright with joy. Wade stood near the back, hat in his hands, and when Jonah passed him afterward, the 2 men shook hands like men choosing the future over the graveyard of old lies. If this ending brought you a little peace, let it stay with you. And if you believe truth can heal what pride has broken, like this story, share your heart in the comments and subscribe for more emotional frontier tales. That evening, Clara and Jonah returned to the Hale Ranch. The supper table had 4 chairs, as it always had. But that night, 2 were filled, and the empty ones no longer seemed like sorrow. They seemed like room. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through the lilacs Jonah's mother had planted. Inside, Clara placed no locked letter in any trunk. She set her hand on Jonah's across the table, and the house that had spent years listening to loneliness finally learned a new sound. "Home,"